Welcome, multicultural literature students, to my first screencast. And this screencast is going to take you through the expectations I have for you to complete literary analysis response number 1. And as you know, on the assignment sheet, there are basically 4 items I want you to be able to make sure you're accomplishing in this first writing assignment. Number 1 being beginning with a clear thesis statement. Number 2, you have body paragraphs with topic sentences, specific evidence from the poem, transitions, and a concluding sentence. Number 3, you're providing a 3 to 4 sentence conclusion. And number 4, of course, this is going to be roughly 1 page typed, double spaced. So let's get to it. The sample that I provided is basically meeting the same requirements that I've outlined for you. And now we're going to take the time to walk through at least the very first point of the expectations for the assignment. You'll notice that I do not have an introductory paragraph. I don't think it is necessary for this assignment, so therefore I'm not requiring that you have one. Instead, we're going to have a thesis statement, which will very clearly outline, as you can tell, I've color-coded in red, the expectations that I have as a writer to accomplish in my first literary analysis piece. As you can tell, I'm looking at breaking silence. I'm going to discuss the imagery that's being utilized by Janice Mirkatani. She's going to create a very powerful, poignant tone in the use of these images, and ultimately it's going to leave the reader feeling a sense of compassion for the Japanese Americans. Now, in my thesis statement, you can see I'm promising to cover 3 things. First of all, I have to provide imagery. Secondly, the images have to be related to the feeling, the overall attitude of the persona in the poem. And finally, what is the impact it has on us, the reader? And of course, as we talked about in class, boredom doesn't count. Okay, next, I know that we have to have 2 body paragraphs of support to use evidence from the text, the poem, to provide the examples and analysis for our thesis statement. So as you can see, my first body paragraph is going to focus, according to my topic sentence, which you are required to have, obviously, in a paragraph, that our author, Janice Mirkatani, is using images related to her mother's inability to speak about her experience in the internment camp. Now, this topic sentence is very specific because I'm selecting images from early on in the poem about her mom's inability to speak. Now, in the body paragraph, the examples I'm using, as you can see in blue, the crippled tongue, the mute wet eyelash, and the testimonies waiting like winter. Of course, these are items that we emphasized in class as part of our reading and discussion in small group. As you can see, when I went through the paragraph, I used those same examples that I mentioned here in a list form in my analysis, my explanation of how these examples relate to the tone, the poignant tone of this poem, at least at this point in the poem. Because I kept referring back to these examples, I still use them in quotations here. So I'm going to reference the crippled tongue. I'm going to use crippled tongue in quotations. I would want you to do the same. Even the word like mute, since you took it from the poem, you want to use it in quotation marks as you present it in the piece or the paragraph that you're writing. So those are my examples. You can see my transitions as well. I have, like, for example, here. I have a word like therefore as I'm continuing my paragraph. You can even use a phrase like considering that few people were willing to speak and others weren't interested in what they had to say. You could use that as kind of transitioning into your analysis of the previous point that you're making. And essentially, you've met the goal of making sure that you've included logical transitions to move from one point to the next. Another important part of this is being sure as you read through this paragraph to include analysis of your examples. Kind of as you see here, this trying to tie in waiting like winter, I try to tie that into this idea of people not wanting to hear or the Japanese Americans being unable to speak about their experiences, therefore being mute, their tongues being crippled. I wanted to make sure I had that information provided in my own words so that analysis is clear. All right, so read through this paragraph and you should be able to hear my voice coming through in the analysis of the evidence. It can't simply just be a listing of information. Analysis has to be provided. The last item that you'll see in this opening paragraph is a concluding statement. So I want to make sure that I don't just end with my final example, but I have a concluding sentence. In this case, it says, within the opening stanza of her poem, her mother's inability to speak of her internment establishes a very powerful tone. Again, the crippled tongue, the mute eyelash, the waiting like winter are all images that lead to the powerful nature of the tone, the feeling that's being exhibited. Now, if you look at the concluding sentence, it reads very similar to the topic sentence. Again, I'm assuming that this is information you would have learned or received from different English courses you've had prior to multicultural literature. All right, moving on next, we have the second body paragraph. You'll have a second one as well. If you look for the topic sentence right away, you can see that I'm continuing to focus on this idea of imagery and how it affects the tone. So you can see the word like images, more images in this topic sentence. You can see the idea that it's a powerful tone identified in the topic sentence. And I tried to even be very specific with where the examples were coming from. If you remember in the poem, the description of her mother testifying in front of the Wartime Relocation Commission was pretty specific. So I wanted to identify that that's when I was talking about these examples. That's where I'm taking the examples from. So from there, you can see again visually, I tried to color code that here is one example, and I'm quoting directly about the flames, the peeling from her like slivers of flame. I used the vat of boiling water down here. And take note also that I have used individual words again, and I continue to quote those individual words as I make reference to them in my analysis. So the examples are there, directly taken from the poem. I use some transitional phrases and words as well. In this instance is one, furthermore is another. I use also after that as well. Again, just trying to build continuity and fluidity in the paragraph through my use of transitions. I would want you to do the same. If you were to take a really close read of this paragraph, you'll see that my voice, again, my analysis is appearing as I explain the examples and how they relate to the tone. One that I think is my favorite here is the idea of the sliver, that's the slivering words that are peeling from her mother. I kind of equate that to a sore. I think many readers can relate to having a sliver within one's hand that would fester over time and become sore. So I wanted to associate that experience with the imagery of the sliver of yellow flame. So the experience that she's reliving is very traumatic and painful for her. So I'm not going to continue going through the analysis part of it. You can read that on your own. But again, one of the more difficult things that you're going to have to accomplish here is not just providing the examples as listing them, but using your voice to analyze those examples in relation to the tone that's being created. So these examples here in this paragraph are to emphasize one more time how powerful the tone is in this piece. So with that, I'm going to demonstrate the last part of this paragraph, kind of like the first one. I have a concluding sentence saying, collectively, the imagery used to depict her mother's testimony contributes to that powerful tone. Kind of going back to that topic sentence one more time and restating it in closing that body paragraph. Again, I want to avoid using or ending my paragraph with the last example. It needs to be tied up and concluded. And speaking of conclusions, that's one of the last items that you have to be aware of, that I would like a 3 or 4 sentence conclusion for your response. And to me, this is kind of the so what of the paragraph, I'm sorry, of the response, that you're providing an explanation as to how the reader is affected by this experience. And to me, it's logical to place this in the conclusion as you are tying up the writing, and as you're reflecting on the tone of the piece, you are bringing in how it affects you. How is a reader essentially left to feel for that persona? So it's hard, as I talk about here, it's hard to imagine if one losing one's freedom for not having done anything wrong, but being associated with the attack at Pearl Harbor. I imagine it would be extremely difficult to move past that experience, because you may feel guilty, you may be humiliated by it. And finally, This idea of 35 years waiting to me is quite unbelievable. And my last statement is just the notion that she has successfully depicted Japanese Americans in general, even her mother specifically, as innocent victims. And it makes me as a reader feel more sympathetic to, I feel more compassionate for Japanese Americans and what they had to struggle through because of Pearl Harbor and the years that followed. So again, the concluding paragraph is more than just saying, here's what I've already told you in my writing. I would like to see it in this instance be more of a, so what? Why do these images and this tone have importance? What do they do to the reader, and how does it make the reader feel? So this is where your in-depth thinking and kind of connecting the dots to all of this imagery and tone appears. With that, we have met really the qualifications for the first three items of our expectations for this assignment. And as you notice this, mine isn't double spaced, but it's pretty close to a page in length. Now I know that may be unfair because, I'm the teacher and I'm the one who's supposed to know these poems maybe better than the students studying them for the very first time. But that being said, yours is allowed to be double spaced. It can definitely exceed 1 page, but it should be more than a half a page because, again, you're selecting a poem of interest to you and you're picking the details from the poem that are of interest to you as it pertains to this notion of tone and impact on readers. So with that, I wish you the best on this. I hope this screencast has been helpful in at least explaining what it is that I want and I need from you to try to accomplish for this task. If you have any questions or concerns when you are completing this task, feel free to email me or come in and talk to me during an open lab or during your mods that are open, and hopefully I can give you some more assistance. Thanks.